Good. Good to know. I'm ready for my close-up.
Just keep it away.
No, I'll be up there. It's okay. Just not there. Understood. Matt, you're gonna take candidates. You're gonna take candidates. No. Just getting started. You're gonna do. Okay. All right. I see how this.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for signing the petition. Thank you. I'm a big fan of Landsman. I'll go for him. Thank you.
It's slow process. The lights are light me.
Steph is in town.
Yes.
Came and stayed with her.
He looked at it and he said, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's just eventually, it wasn't official. Said different half of the step.
There's GP, C, P, D, N. Is Ed joining us? No. Okay, great.
And we hope Greg Landsman is going to
Yes. I had to write it down myself. Builders. But I'll talk more about it too. So anything you leave out, I'll hit you.
Nice picture was there when we went to the.
Mind if I give a little intro?
Which is a black hole.
Yeah.
Half the world.
It's a positive development.
Ready? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Try again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. For those who I don't know, I'm Dean Owen Thompson, Dean of Cathedral. We're happy to be able to continue to host the community forums. I'm so grateful for the community forum board that brings these opportunities for us to get together to talk through these issues that are affecting us as citizens of not only our community, but of the nation as a whole. And I really appreciate the topics that we've talked about thus far. And this particular one that we're talking about today, gun violence, is especially one close to my heart, and I trust ours as well. For me as a father rearing two boys who are looking at the stuff of the world and kind of wondering, is it safe to go outside? I hope to one day, or tell them, yeah, it is, we're working on it. We have Greg Landsman joining us this afternoon. Hello, good sir, welcome. And we also have Jack Joes, who's from CPDN, which is the Community Peace Building Network, sponsored out of the Cathedral, which is done some great work addressing the issue of gun violence that is tearing our city and our nation asunder. Some of you who maybe saw the headlines this morning, 7 countries issued travel ban warning, or travel warnings, I should say, for people traveling to the United States, because we become a place that people are afraid to come because of our violence and gun violence. And so I'm glad we're able to talk about these issues, and not just talk about them, but take those actionable steps necessary to address those issues. And so in my tradition, for those who aren't familiar, Jesus said, when 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, there we shall be in the midst. And we may be a small gathering, but love is present in us, and the pen is mightier than the bullet. And so whatever we can do to make a difference, I hope we'll do what we can with the power that we have in community with each other. So again, welcome, and I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Well, thank you. We better get right with our Congressman Greg Landsman, because he has to go so we can do the first part of the program. I was attracted to call Congressman Landsman's office because he was so outraged by a recent gun violence, concerned about his children. And so Christ Church has been involved in gun violence at the local level, especially focused on youth. And that's why Jack Joes is here to talk about that in the second part of the forum. But we're so pleased to have our former city council member and now Congressman Greg Landsman to talk about what he can do and what we can help him do at the national level in terms of getting some control over this issue of guns and gun violence. So I'm turning it over to Greg.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. We had votes this morning, and we'll be back up here next week for votes. Hopefully, we'll have a resolution on the debt ceiling. And one of the things we did was a sort of safety net option, which is what's called a discharge petition, where if 218 or a majority of Congress signs this discharge petition, we can get a vote on what would be a lifting of the debt ceiling. And I hope all 213 Democrats support it. I signed it yesterday. It's actually a document that sits in the well of Congress, and you go in and sign it. And that was the first discharge petition I've signed. I suspect there will be more. In fact, I know there will be more, or at least that's the plan, particularly as it relates to reducing gun violence and keeping our children and families safe. And so I'm part of an anti-gun violence task force that has been working over the course of the last several weeks to get votes on a whole host of very sensible reforms that will absolutely keep people safe. And so starting later this summer, you will see, I believe, and this is the plan, a set of similar discharge petitions where we are going to ask for an up or down vote on bringing back the assault weapons ban, the highly effective ban on assault weapons that kept a lot of people safe in the 90s. So reestablishing that, and then each and every month, another discharge petition asking for a vote on comprehensive criminal background checks, and then votes from there on out every month. So safe storage reform, red flag laws that will allow law enforcement to get these weapons, guns away from those who want to do bad things with them, and so on and so forth. And so what I hope you will see and again expect is a group of us, and hopefully ultimately a majority of us, who are going to push for and vote on the kinds of gun safety reforms that will absolutely turn the tide and keep people safe, and as I've been saying, end this nightmare that we're all experiencing. And those of us with children in school, it is becoming the most important issue. Keeping our children safe is obviously paramount. It's the most important responsibility we have as parents, and we're struggling to do that with the proliferation of not just guns but weaponry, weapons that are being used in our schools to shred, murder children. And so you may not be able to see this, but on my lapel is an assault weapons ban pin that I wear everywhere. And I've developed a good bipartisan reputation in my first 5 months here. As I have these conversations about all kinds of really important bipartisan legislation, I do it with this on my lapel. So folks know that this is one of those big bipartisan issues. For the American people it is, and it ought to be for members of Congress. So I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions. And I just appreciate you all taking on this issue, and keep fighting.
Are you optimistic about getting bipartisan support for some of these measures?
Ultimately, very optimistic. Whether it'll happen this year or in this Congress, I don't know. But yes, I'm very optimistic that ultimately we will give the American people what they're asking for, which is getting these weapons of war out of their communities, having criminal background checks, requiring safe storage, empowering law enforcement with the red flag laws. I mean, we have the Second Amendment. I believe in the Second Amendment. I grew up in Butler County with, all kinds of things, including, friends and family that all have guns. And it's just a big part of our communities and our culture. And so, I'm a big believer in protecting that and children and families in our communities at the same time, which we can do. So, I liken it to, cars. We all have the freedom when we're 16 years old to, or whatever state we're in, 17, 18, but usually it's 16 to, go get trained and get a license and get a vehicle. And it's a huge responsibility because, cars can be deadly. They used to be the #1 cause of death for certain communities of people. And now for children, it's guns. And we ought to treat, guns the same way we treat cars. Let people have them, but just we have to make sure that they're sufficiently managed, regulated, and folks have the training, and law enforcement have the tools that they need to keep everyone safe. And we've done that with cars.
I have a question. Hello, thank you, Congressman Landsman, for the work that you're doing. My name is Rhonda Mangieri, and my question is, who is doing the work and identifying what source these military assault style weapons are being dumped into our communities. It seems there's a pattern across the nation where there's a proliferation of guns being dropped into neighborhoods, and particularly the underserved communities. And I want to know who on the national, what entity on the national level is doing the work on identifying the source. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the ATF primarily, and there are attempts to defund the ATF by folks who get most of their campaign cash from these huge gun corporations. These gun corporations, and we talk about gun manufacturers, but they're just giant corporations that make an insane amount of money selling these guns and these weapons. They spend a lot of money on members of Congress. I don't take any corporate PAC money, and certainly don't take any money from these folks. But others do. And, so then it's not surprising when they go out and try to attack not just the legislation, but the federal agencies that are trying to keep people safe by getting these guns out of their communities, which at the moment is the ATF. And there's a real effort to try to get them defunded. It's not going to happen, but, just know that that's what we're up against.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Components used in opposition to safe storage, background checks, and then the assault rifles. I mean, it sounds like it requires three different sort of lines of thought to say, well, we never could do that. Whereas it's just simply, we can't do anything because that would threaten the whole Second Amendment.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think, there's really two big schools of thought. And one is the Second Amendment is written or will be interpreted as protecting all things, and it doesn't have any nuance like any other amendment has nuances. And so, yeah, I think there's some folks who are just going to hide behind that, even though it's really just these big companies giving them, enormous amounts of money to keep them from, doing a very pragmatic stuff around safe storage. I mean, guns that aren't stored safely is a big reason why we're losing a lot of our friends and family and children. That's up there at the top of the list. In terms of gun-related murders, it's guns that are sitting around that aren't, safely stored, and, requiring that is pretty basic and does not at all infringe upon anyone's Second Amendment rights. But they'll hide behind the Second Amendment, but they're just doing that because they can't stand up. They just refuse to stand up to their big donors and the people who help pay for their campaigns. I mean, that's the larger sort of fraud that's being perpetrated here, and it is. I think, corruption. It is people taking money from these big companies and then doing their bidding. That's corruption. Otherwise, safe storage is pretty basic stuff. Yeah, if you're going to have a deadly weapon, which is your right, under the Second Amendment, not and I think the right only extends to guns and rifles, not weapons of war. It needs to be stored safely, and the same is true for red flag laws. We should absolutely empower law enforcement to remove these weapons from people who clearly have issues. I do not believe that you can be against red flag laws and for police officers. So, but again, they're getting all this cash from these big gun companies, and that's really the driver.
If I can ask a question, I gotta go, but can I ask a question? In terms of talk with your opponents, if you will, and just in terms of what's the end game, in terms of the Second Amendment, we have all these guns, right? Is the goal to blow each other up until there's nothing left? And so in the land of the free, the home of the brave, what are we afraid of? That we need to arm ourselves against each other. And because you may have heard that 7 countries listed us as a place to be wary of for their citizens to travel to. And are our representatives mindful of the reputation of the United States as being the Wild West in the 21st century?
I certainly am. And those of us who are pushing for very basic, very common sense, very effective gun safety legislation, I'm very much aware of this. I don't know about the others, and whether they're just ignoring that reality or they're just so taken by these gun companies and how much money they get from them. I don't know. It's a really good question, and I think the more they hear from you all and others, the better. But it is absolutely true. I mean, I just came back from being in Israel, and Israel is considered to be this very unsafe place, and you got to be careful when you travel to Israel. I've been to Israel so many times, and I can tell you, I never feel unsafe. In large part because there's no gun violence in Israel. There are IDF folks. This is the Israel Defense forces and or people, because every Israeli has to go. Well, not every. Most Israelis have to go through the IDF, spend 3 years in the military. And, a lot of them will carry guns on them after the fact, but that's it. No one else has guns. There's no gun stores in Israel. You can't just walk into a grocery store and buy some guns. And so, yeah, in Jerusalem, there may be a stabbing, but, there's not going to be, you don't have the kind of everyday gun violence, certainly no mass shootings. We are a place that, that is living a nightmare. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. We're in the middle of a nightmare. And, for folks like me, it's worrying about our kids and knowing that there's going to be more school shootings, more dead children. And for others, it's the fact that they live in neighborhoods where there's shootings every night, every day. In DC, there was a shooting and a bullet hit a 10-year-old girl who died this morning. It's going to require a generation of parents, and it's going to have to be white parents and Black parents, Republicans, Democrats, independents. But this generation of parents, we have to end this nightmare, and we're not going to do it in a single election cycle, but, we ought to commit ourselves to ending this nightmare.
Question about the PAC, the money that's going to Congress, which you say is corruption, and I agree. Is that a result of the PACs that you can't identify? Okay, so that's the first
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we need to pass, HR, what was HR1 for the People's Act. It had disclosure and dark money reform in there. But yes, we need to our democracy is in desperate need of reform. And I believe so strongly in this democracy that I decided to run for Congress. And that's why I'm here. I'm here because I care so deeply about, children and families in Cincinnati and greater Cincinnati and our region. Ultimately, this is for the next decade going to be a fight about our democracy and our freedom, and getting this money out of politics and making sure people know who's paying for what is going to be key to fixing our democracy and, dealing with this issue of gun violence.
In the short term, is there any way that those Congress people can be identified who take this huge PAC money? And just do an embarrassment campaign, just publish and have see if the more liberal networks will dare a list of people who are taking this kind of money. Because most of us don't know. Don't have it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that it's very important for people to take what the gun companies are putting into these campaigns and make that front and center. I mean, I certainly did when I, ran, and I don't want to be political at all. That's just a fact. I think it's very important for people to know who's paying for this stuff.
Who the congressmen are that are receiving, that's the critical thing.
Yeah.
My second question is, can Congress, in light of this ruling by the Supreme Court that considers PACs as human individuals, can you craft a legislation which would clearly define what an individual is, so to eliminate that argument from the Supreme Court? Could you get around the PACs in that way?
Citizens United.
Yeah, yes, Congress needs to fix it. And HR 1, or for the People's Act, which was taken up and passed in the last Congress by the House, did not pass the Senate, and that's why we don't have it as law. Will need to be taken up again and again until it's passed and becomes law, and it will have to be passed alongside judicial reform, so that the courts, which are absolutely packed by folks who are getting there's corruption on this court. We've seen it with Justice Thomas, and we have to reform what's happening in the judiciary, starting with the Supreme Court, so that when we pass meaningful pro-democracy, pro-freedom reforms, they don't get shot down by a court that's been bought and paid for by these billionaires.
My third thing is, can there be legislation that mandates that when you sell a gun, you have to sell something to block it? The research on compliance shows that if people pay for things, they are more likely to use them.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I certainly, anything that's going to help, I would be, I think it's worth putting on the table. I've got to go. I think maybe I could do one more question. I'm getting pulled here, but if there's one more, and I know my team is there, you got Zach and Kelly at least. And you all, if you don't have my cell phone or my email, Zach and Kelly can give it to you so that you can always be in touch with me. I may be up here more than I used to be, I guess, right? So of course, more than I used to be, but I'm still home 65% of the time, and want to make sure that I'm as responsive and engaged with you all as humanly possible.
Congressman, I just have one quick question, if you could take it back with you. Okay, my name is Betsy, and my question is this. Hi, my question is this. When I recently read the New York Times version of what happened the day that Sandy Hook occurred, it's very lengthy. The photos were all redacted, except for a couple. And parents of the Sandy Hook children wanted it that way. What I'm wondering is if those folks, those Congress people in particularly the extremely pro-gun people should be shown those photos without them being redacted. Would it change their minds? Because just the words alone gave me the image. I mean, it couldn't be as horrible as the image itself, but I really wondered if that would be useful to show those people those photos.
Yes, I mean, I think the country has to see these photos. I mean, I don't think that we can, I know we can't continue to turn a blind eye to what has happened to these children. And I've said, and will continue to say that, you know, Emmett Till's mother, her decision to force the country to see what they did to her baby, to her child, was a very important moment for the country. And it changed the, not the trajectory of the civil rights movement, but it gave it much more power and fuel and energy. And the same is going to have to be true for the kind of carnage that's happening in these schools, in these supermarkets. We're going to have to see it. And for those of us who are already there, it's just going to be painful, but we can't avert our eyes. And for those who aren't there yet or who haven't prioritized this, I think they have to see it. I will tell you, there are some that are so entrenched in their position that it won't matter. I had a colleague who saw my pin the other day. I think it was this week. No, it was last week. And he said, "What is that pin?" And I said, "You know what that pin is, you know, like." And he Republican, and he said, "You know, a lot of people in your district like those guns." And I said, "They're weapons." And no, most people don't. I know there are some that do, but most people do not want these in our communities. They belong with the military. They're military weapons. And he said, "I think you're wrong, but I don't know what your issue is with them." And I said, "Well, they shred children." And he said, "They shred what they're pointed at." And he smiled. I don't know if seeing a shredded child is going to change his mind. I hope. I pray to God it would, but I don't know. But that, whether it changes his mind or not, you're 100% correct. We can no longer avert our eyes.
I have a quick question. Does your proposal include a mechanism that would allow for holding the gun owner criminally responsible for what is done by a minor or anybody else who shouldn't have had the gun, getting the gun and using it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that one will get probably the most pushback, but that typically means it will have the most impact in terms of people being very careful with their guns and making sure they store them safely, and that when they sell them, it's done properly. And we do not have the current infrastructure to do that. We need it, but that's how vehicles work. So.
Well, we want to thank Congressman Landsman, and we want to be as helpful as we can to your efforts to get something moving here. So be in touch with us.
You will. All right. Well, I appreciate you all. Sorry to have to talk about something so awful, but here we are.
We need to do it. We have to do it. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Thank you.
Well, on that happy note, I'm Jack Jost. I'm a longtime member here at Christ Church Cathedral. And I'd like to thank you guys for having me back to talk about our work on gun violence prevention. Just a little bit about me, I was in public education for 25 years. The last 10, I was a high school principal. As a high school principal, I on occasion encountered gun violence in ways that affected my students, or in fact, guns coming into my school where I worked on 3 separate occasions. In those occasions, we were always alerted by students who knew it was wrong, who came and told us, and we were able to confiscate weapons before they could cause harm. I had a student who was shot in a dispute over a high school boy. I kept trying to get her to just say it was a dog fight. Like, it was just, in my mind, it was so embarrassing to be shot in a dispute over a boy. But that was her reality. That was where she came from. That was her experience. And so when Christ Church Cathedral started looking 5 years ago about what to do about gun violence here in Cincinnati, I volunteered to be part of that work. And there was a task force that talked with national experts about this. There aren't international experts because there's no other country that has this problem, right? To talk with national experts about how to address this problem in the United States. I was part of that work, and then we created the working group. Judith Robinson was leading that and asked me to help her with that, and I gladly said yes. And so in the last 5 years, we've been working in Price Hill and across Cincinnati to look for research database solutions to how to end or curb gun violence here in Cincinnati. And I want to talk a little bit about that work, all of which has been sponsored by Christ Church Cathedral. And I want to say again, all these things that Representative Landsman is talking about are things that are solutions that can't even happen at the local level. We can't ban assault weapons in Cincinnati. We can't pass red flag laws. We can't pass safe storage laws. In fact, in the state of Ohio, the legislature has passed laws preventing municipalities from passing laws that would make ourselves safer. They've actually prevented the implementation of these laws in our strongly illegally gerrymandered state legislature. So our question was, what can we do here? And so what we did, first we started out fact finding, and we met with local police, local activists, local community members, and just asked, what are you doing? How can we help? And we got pointed to the direction of Price Hill. At the time when we started this work, Price Hill, which has 3 separate communities recognized by the city, Lower Price Hill, and West Price Hill. 2 of them were continually in the top 3 most violent communities in the city. But we were directed to go there in part because they had a large number of organizations that were working to address that problem. And so with just 2 of us and some funding from the cathedral, we went there and we just met with everybody in that neighborhood and said, how can we help? What can we do? And we started attending meetings. And it's there that we met. I want to make sure I shout out some of the people we met. There's a Lower Price Hill Violence Prevention Committee that meets every month at the Joe Williams Family Center. And worked with Jessica Polzine and her group there that works with the community. And we worked with Patty Hogan and her Safety Cat program, which employs youth to do cleaning and in the neighborhood. It gives them income and gives them pride in their neighborhood. We also met along the way Ray Sean Smith, who started a group called Unheard Voices of gun violence victims, wheelchair bound, who are looking to do athletic or other events together. So we found a lot of people who were passionate and who were doing the work and whose lives were dramatically affected by gun violence. And we just said, how can we help? And it got us involved with a huge network. And I'm proud to say 5 years later, this is not our responsibility. We were just present as it happened. For about the last 8 months, none of those Price Hill communities have been in the top 10 most violent communities here in Cincinnati. Where there was a strong groundswell of groups working together in the community, they were able to address the needs, not because we came in and said, here's what you need to do. We came in and said, how can we help? How can we support you in the community? Because it turns out the community knows what the community needs, right? And it's our responsibility to listen. So with that going on, we met Mitch Morris, who works with Cincinnati Works in the Phoenix program. And he, for a decade here in maybe 2 decades here in Cincinnati has been working with people on the front lines of shootings. When there's a shooting in the community, the police call him and he talks to families and sometimes shields mothers from seeing their disfigured dead children, and has conversations with people in the neighborhood to prevent what often happens, which is carry on revenge violence. But there are other people in the city who are doing this work, and I'll talk about some more of them in just a second. But Mitch, 4 years ago, said, I want to have a summit. I want to get everybody together in the city, and let's talk about how we can prevent gun violence. And so we did that event, and then COVID happened, and we were unable to get together for a couple of years. But in October of this year, we got together again here in the basement of Christ Church Cathedral. And we brought in experts locally, but we also brought in Erica Ford, whose work with Light Camp in New York City, and specifically in Queens, New York City, took one of New York City's most violent neighborhoods and almost totally eliminated gun violence by a whole host of community-based solutions to the problem. Not saying here's what you have to do, but saying how can we help? And then the city invested in a big way there. About $100 million they spent on gun violence prevention last year alone. They're 23 times larger than us, so that's what, $4.7 million in Cincinnati dollars to do the same level of work. And borough by borough, they started implementing boots on the ground, knocking on doors, hiring returning felons, especially those who were involved in gun violence and drugs. And the reason you have to hire those folks and use those folks, and this is where our advocacy is so important, you have to hire people who are in that work because they're the only ones who are credible with the people who are doing that now. That frankly, I, as a upper middle-aged, white male who lives in the city, but I don't walk in, if I go to talk to someone who's dealing drugs, I don't walk in with a lot of credibility. I don't know where they're coming from. They don't know where I'm coming from. And I could talk to them blue in the face about what's bad about what they're doing. I'm not going to reach them. We need credible people to walk into the neighborhoods and say, here's how we can help them change. But we also need real answers. And so the group from the summit, a small group of us, went to New York City and met with Erica Ford, spent a couple of days there and just saw what they did on the ground. And we have committed to coming back and implementing that same solution here in the city. And in April, we brought in to the city and presented to the safety committee a specific solution that we think could help reduce gun violence. And it's a program called Advanced Peace. And the gentleman involved in that, Devon Bogan, has been working in multiple cities across the United States. And he does, not only does he reach out to those individuals that I mentioned before, people who've been involved in the drug trade, people committing gun violence. We also know that around the area of gun violence, there are those people we catch, but there are people who are involved in it who we don't catch, who we know, who we suspect. But by using the people who are directly involved to engage them in a program that helps them rebuild their lives, by not just giving them employment, but actually paying them a stipend. Very, very highly controversial idea, right? To pay a person a stipend to keep them from shooting people. But if it costs you $10,000 a month to help somebody turn their life around and prevent shootings, and you weigh that against about $1 million as an estimate of what one shooting costs a municipality in terms of resources spent, it's an investment, it's a cost savings. And then through counseling, through work, they do a series of innovative programs, but it's about journaling, setting life goals, providing daily available check-ins, daily, not periodic, checking with these individuals daily to make sure they're meeting their needs. That's how they turn people around. And that's why he's had 70% gun violence reductions in some of the communities where he's worked. Just dramatic turnaround. So we strongly advocate for the city that we need to invest heavily in advanced peace. In the meantime, and it sometimes takes a city a little while to turn around, especially going through the budget process, we have formed the Community Peace Builders Network, CPBN, which the dean was kind enough to mention earlier. The Community Peace Builders Network is comprised primarily of people who've been doing this work for generations here in Cincinnati. That includes Rodney Christian, who on his own in East Westwood has provided this kind of work and support for people in East Westwood, catching grants where he can, getting money where he can, using the space available to him and advocating for the people in his community. Mitch Morris, who I mentioned earlier, is part of this group. Tiara Powell, who also lives in East Westwood and does this work across the city, has been very effective in responding to gun violence or preventing gun violence here in the city. Bishop Ennis Tate, who does this work in Avondale and who started multiple ministries, and who in fact was standing with a young man in Avondale near the Family Dollar when that man was shot in the face. He's just actively involved with a group of young men who are likely to be sorry, I want to get this right. I want to say this respectfully. These are young men whose circumstances and situations and behaviors at this point suggest they might be on a trajectory to commit gun violence. And he's intervening with them on a daily basis to make sure they see another alternative. These are folks who are boots on the ground doing the day-to-day work of preventing gun violence in Cincinnati. And along with them, myself and Carol Womeldorf, who's a researcher and a gun violence prevention activist, have formed the Community Peace Builders Network. And with a lot of support from Jan Michelle Lemon-Kearney and Judith Robinson, my partner here, Dino and Thompson, and the outreach committee here at the Cathedral, we are working in Cincinnati to break this intergenerational cycle of gun violence. And I wanted to come in and just talk about that, to brag about what the church has done and the work that we see ahead of us, that it takes all of this. It takes Greg Landsman and others working at the national level to do things we can't do locally, but it takes us working locally to do things that he can't do nationally, right? And that is intervention individually, preventing gun violence, one person, one situation, one conflict at a time. I'd love to answer any questions about our work or anything else, and I don't want to impose on our time. I don't know if we have a hard stop time or. All right. Well, if you have any questions, my hope is that I thoroughly answered them in my presentation. But if you have any questions about our work or how we can help, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, how do people, how would someone like myself help and or participate in community peace building network, right?
This is one of the questions we have. Yes, and you got that right. Community Peace Builders Network. And this has been a missing piece that Judith and I have struggled with, right? That if I think few of us are equipped to have a conversation that prevents a person from committing gun violence because we're not where that person is. Physically, we're not where that person is. Mentally and emotionally, we're not where that person is. But meanwhile, all of the individuals I mentioned have programs where they work with youth in their area. And maybe it's a homework helper. Maybe it's in Lower Price Hill, the Joe Williams Family Center has a gym. They work with kids after school. So there are places, or they do Christmas events, or we do awareness events. And those would be places where us could come in to a neighborhood where we don't live and yet be of benefit, be useful, and help out. And I think the next step for our work is to make sure that a large number of people know, hey, we're doing a awareness raising on the bridge. We've done Hands Across a Bridge near where shootings have happened. Just awareness raising and saying to people in that community, look, we care. You aren't forgotten. You aren't ignored. Which 5 years ago I thought was an insignificant gesture. But I will tell you time and time again, people from the community have said to us, I didn't even think you guys knew we existed. In West End, I was told, I thought we were a community everybody just drove through really fast. And we're so thankful that you're here. So I think it's about showing up. It's about being present, giving money as able. Pastor Taves spends more than $1,000 on snacks. When you've got a dozen or 15 young men, we all eat, and young men eat more than all of us, right? And so he's just tearing through money just to keep the young men fed, right? When they come and hang out with him. So there's lots of ways that we can give, and I think it's part of our work to help make sure that we answer that question more thoroughly. That is a vaccine question, and I thank you for that. Yes.
Is there any movement to get retirees and other people to tutor at the libraries? I've been the Walnut Hills Library and the Pleasant Ridge Library is packed with kids after school. and they're doing their homework, and one of the librarians said, I'm not a librarian anymore. And she needs to be a librarian, but is there a movement like that where you could volunteer in your neighborhood and go help whatever kid shows up after school?
I know that those places exist. I think in the library system, it's based on the availability and the interest of the children's librarian typically in that area. But and I think thinking particularly about the needs of senior citizens, like a less active place, like the Joe Williams Center is very active, like there's a gym there. And I'm thinking, I don't know, as a senior citizen, if I'd want to be volunteering there. When I become one. That's another question I think it's really important for us to ask. And
Well, I think the libraries, kids show up and they're there. But there's not much supervision other than to say, keep the noise down. The librarian does not have time to work individually with a child.
Right.
And somebody came every week and they knew that on Tuesday, Mr. So-and-so was going to be dealing with.
it might help. And especially if that person's experienced in working with youth and has done that before, and you've got a couple of kids who are committed to do that work. I know one of the early responses was a lot of the libraries, including my library in Westwood, they hired security. And I'm like, well, that's not really the message I want to send to kids who are like going to the library, right? And I was once asked, we had a group of students who would stay after school at my school, even after we closed the front doors, and they just stay in they're just the front foyer there. And one of my employees came up to me and says, why is it always those kids? And what he meant is, why is it the kids who are frequently in trouble? And, at school, who'd identify themselves through what we would identify as misbehavior. And I said, well, why do you think that is? And he's like, well, they're just here. Why don't they go home? I said, okay, you're getting there. Why do you think that is? And he goes, oh, their home's probably, I said, yeah. Yeah, the kids who choose to stay here, the kids who choose to be in the library, not 100%, but some of the kids who choose, they seek out the least chaotic place they can find, the safest place they can find, because they want to do the right thing. They want to figure this all out. And so and it's our responsibility as a community to help those kids find those spaces, right? And to make as many of those spaces as possible.
Two Christchurch plugs for Todd's question. There's a meeting right now of the summer reading program, which is partially sponsored by Christchurch, but by others. And it's 8 sites, 125 kids for the summer reading program that is always looking for volunteers to be a part of that. It's not your library, but it's the same population that you're talking about. And then the other thing, which is a fledgling effort, is there's a group of senior citizens, which some of us are a part of, in Christchurch, that are meeting, and one of their focuses is how can we be volunteers that are useful? And one of the ideas that came up right away was trying to assist in the libraries as tutors. So within the churches or other organizations, I think there are groups that are trying to find that path, but I'm pretty sure. I know if you walked into our Mount Washington library and said, could I volunteer to help kids after school? They'd have your library card and your phone number before you could say yes. So.
Jack, is the city doing anything in terms of the kind of efforts you're?
Yes. We can quibble over whether it's enough.
Yeah.
And actually, I would suggest that even they feel like it's not enough. They're trying to figure their way forward and how to use the partnerships and the grants that exist. We've tried through SERVE, we've tried a street outreach program before. It was effective. It went the way that programs sometimes do. And its remnants are around. There's passion for it. There's people who did the work and were trained in the work, but it needs, I think, clearer focus. I think the best way forward, and it's a way that Columbus has taken, it's a way that New York City has taken, and by the way, New York City, although pilloried in the popular press, is actually remarkably a safe place. In the 16 most per capita of the 16 most gun violent cities in the United States, Ohio has 4 of those. We have 25% of the most violent cities in the nation per capita. And Cincinnati is one of those. And all of those Ohio cities are more dangerous per capita than New York City, because New York City has taken this on head on. They've created an office of violence prevention in the mayor's office where there's direct authority and direct responsibility reporting to the mayor about what's at work. And we think with advanced peace, ideally, we'd like to have the mayor say there's going to be an office of violence prevention. We're going to do advanced peace and we're going to jump in with both feet, because we know whatever that cost is, if we prevent one murder, it's economically better for us to spend all this money, even if we just prevent one, even though data shows we'll prevent 70% of them. Right? That I think there's an easy way forward. But that's easy for me to say because I'm not balancing the needs of an entire city. Right? And I understand the complication of that. So the city is doing stuff, and I think everybody would agree it's not enough and they should do more. But there are budgets, there are realities, there are competing needs.
You've had some contact with them after your visit to New York in terms
Yeah, and we're hoping to set up a way initially that we can bring some aspects of advanced peace or lay the groundwork for advanced peace to come here in the future. We've been really engaged in that. The Community Peace Builders Network has been very engaged in that. And we hope to be partners with anybody who wants to join with us and do this work. And the city would be the most powerful partner in that. And we would welcome their full partnership and to work with them and share the resources that we got from visiting these locations. Pastor Tate has also visited Baltimore, and we've seen how programs work in other cities. And the city has a vast number of resources because we visited other places. So how do we put all that knowledge in one room and make sure we're all pushing in the same direction? I think you do that through an office of violence prevention. I thank you guys so much for your passion and your interest, your excellent questions. You're thinking about this and getting involved, and that's a question I think we have to answer. How can we get involved? But again, I really especially appreciate when we talk to our friends and our neighbors and we say, actually, what we need to do is we need to listen to the community. We need to change lives in the community by empowering communities to make their own decisions. If we pass an assault weapons ban tomorrow, that isn't going to solve most of the murders that happen in Cincinnati. That it's still people getting handguns, having individual conflicts. And we can solve that with a program like Advanced Peace and with work done by Mitch Morris, Rodney Christian, Bishop Tate, working one-on-one with people, and Tierra Powell working one-on-one to prevent it. And we have to talk to our neighbors to say it's okay to put money into that, and that when we're paying this person a stipend to turn their life around, it makes sense. First of all, as an economic investment, but second of all, it's just what it takes. It's the right thing to do.
Well, thank you, Jack.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
That was a great question. We've been struggling. Yeah, and it's a board if you walk in here. There's a sheet. Tomorrow he shows up.